thank all of you for joining us for this third session of day 3. And it is our last session of the conference altogether too, which makes me kind of sad. It's been such a wonderful conference to be a part of, and I look forward to reliving it once the recordings are launched on the website. This final session is called Amplifying the Outputs and Impacts of Research, and it is moderated by PxP Steering Committee member Janice Tufte, who I'm going to hand it over to now. Thanks so much, Janice.
Thank you for having us here today. And as Joletta mentioned, it's the third session, the third day, and it's about amplifying outputs and impacts of research and how patient partners can get involved in communication research findings. And we encourage everyone to feel free to share in the chat where you're from and any affiliation, as well as comments and resources you might have to share. And please post your questions in the Q&A. And when you're talking about outputs, we are generally referring to sharing research findings, though impacts on research and outputs can be found in different forms, writing a blog or running a podcast or developing an abstract, to submitting one to a conference and serving as a patient partner reviewer and more. And Hetty, we've got a poll for all of you here today, and Hetty's going to pull up the first one. There's 2 questions. There's 2 different polls and 2 questions for each poll. The first one is, have you participated with creating or co-creating shared research findings? Answer yes or no. Second one is, how have you shared, if you have? We'll give you a couple minutes. I'm not sure how long we've waited for the results on these, or is this about enough time?
We're still getting some answers, Janice, just so that you know. Yeah, I'd give it maybe 10 more seconds.
Okay. We're having interesting technical challenges here, and we have purple people, 2 of us, and so one went mainstream. Anyway, the poll will show up in just a minute. So it appears many of you, like 75%, have co-created or created shared research findings. And I'm glad to see that a quarter of you haven't, and I hope you learned something. And the people that have done it, that you could share some of your, your best resources and highlights. And social media appears to be kind of a hit parade here today as far as sharing findings, next by presenting at a conference, and then blogs and podcasts. So we're going to move on to each one of us introducing ourselves, and we're going to start off with Eileen sharing some of your output involvements and results and outcomes.
All right, thank you so much, Janice. I am excited to talk about this subject. I wrote a little bit about myself and all what I've done, because it's the end of the day here and we're all kind of a little bit tired. As some of you already know me, my name is Eileen Davidson. I'm from Vancouver, BC, Canada. And in 2015, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. At that time, I was a single mom with a 2-year-old, and I was working as an esthetician. Like many, though, arthritis landed me on disability. I started my blog and social media channels under the name Chronic Eileen in 2017. I did this because I wanted others to know they are not alone in their struggles with chronic disease. And I wanted to dismantle the misconceptions and stigmas that I was experiencing with this disease in particular. At the time when I started my blog, I was worried that nobody would listen or I would be made fun of, but that was not the case at all, because I'm here. And yeah, so it's been 5 years since I launched my blog and social media channels, and now I can proudly say that I have over 100 published articles, including in medical journals. I'm a regular writer for a popular arthritis publication called Creaky Joints, and my blog has been named one of the best arthritis blogs to follow by a number of health websites. The media also contacts me quite a bit for interviews because of my knowledge and my experiences. Now, I have no formal training in writing, web development, social media, or graphics. I'm completely self-taught and decided to take my 8 years of experience with disease and share it with others in my own true, authentic voice. In fact, actually, next week I fly to New Jersey and talk about this to a room full of other patient advocates using social media to leverage their message and build skills. My involvement in arthritis organizations and research has given me an incredible amount of inspiration, knowledge, and understanding of my disease to be able to explain it well. I am an Arthritis Research Canada Patient Advisory Board member and chair of their newsletter now. And I can proudly say that I have attended in person the Canadian, US, and European rheumatology conferences in person. And this year I'm presenting my second patient perspective poster at the American College of Rheumatology conference in San Diego later this year. Now, social media isn't the only way that I share research results or opportunities. I host a support group for people with arthritis in my community, funded by a grant I received from the Arthritis Society. And there I often invite researchers to join in a discussion or activities. My knowledge of arthritis from being a patient partner also helps me to be able to answer a lot of questions patients have about arthritis or guide them to the information they are looking for. Being involved in research as a patient partner has given me a lot of confidence in what I say on my social media channels and to not provide any false information. My growth as an advocate and research partner also comes from other volunteer roles that I have. I've been an ambassador for the Arthritis Society, and I am a CIHR para member, alumni, and I am part of the steering committee of this conference. And I even now proudly work with the International Foundation of Autoimmune and Autoinflammatory Arthritis as their community awareness assistant, focusing on disease awareness on social media. And so I'm really excited to be here because it's my subject.
Thank you, Eileen. Now we'll hear from Karen Woolley.
Okay, thank you, Janice. And may I start by acknowledging the Kabi Kabi people who are the traditional custodians on the land where I am, and pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to thank the PxP organisers for inviting me to speak here today, and especially want to thank all the attendees last session, day 3, for giving your time to be at this session. I find it quite inspiring that there are a diverse group of people around the world interested in this topic. My name is Karen Woolley, as you heard, and I now live in Australia, but I've had quite an international focus in my work for the last 30 years. And given the number of Canadians I expect who are attending, I should say that I earned my PhD in medical sciences at McMaster University in Canada, where I also learned how to snowboard and appreciate Tim Horton donuts. So these were also important life lessons. But like many of you attending today, I have worn different hats in my life, and I'm just so fortunate that those hats seem to have combined somehow with my interest in patient involvement in publications. So I am a caregiver, I am a bereaved parent, I am a professor at 2 universities, I have served on the boards of 5 government hospitals serving hundreds of thousands of members of our community, and I also serve on the editorial board of the journal Research Integrity and Peer Review, and I am a medical communication professional. Relevant to this session, I really have had the honor, the opportunity, the privilege of working with patients, and I use that term broadly to include carers, caregivers, to co-create online free and evidence-based resources to help patient advocates become patient authors. You can learn by trial and error, or you can use resources to really help you. And I've also co-created, again, free online evidence-based tools to help people prepare plain language summaries of these peer-reviewed publications. I also worked with patients on the world's first systematic review on patient authorship, so what's seen as the strongest form of evidence, and then have been invited to author international position statements on medical writing and on good publication practices, especially when people are writing up research that's being funded by the healthcare industry. And I think that's really important, that focus on ethical practices. We are seeing an increasing collaboration, which can be perfectly valid and valuable, between patient advocates, academic researchers, and industry. So knowing how to prepare publications ethically and effectively is critically important. I think I'll just finish off by saying, again, thank you. I look forward to learning from people here today and sharing my insights on patient authorship of peer-reviewed publications and plain language summaries of those publications.
Thank you, Karen, for that. And Joe, we wanted to go over to you to share a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much. So for those of you who have been with us today, you are already familiar with me. I'm Jo Belton. And as with many of you who are joining us, I became a pain advocate and patient partner because of my own experiences with pain and struggling to find the right care, resources, and support. I was in the workers' compensation system, which if you've been in it, you can relate that it's an adversarial and difficult system to navigate. I felt like I was always having to prove my pain and having to prove my pain, having to prove my worth and my value and trustworthiness as a human being. When I had the least capacity to advocate for myself, I was forced to, often unsuccessfully. My surgeon, who was a wonderful human who always made me feel believed and that my pain was real, encouraged me to get out of the work comp system and figure things out on my own, which was a pretty surprising thing to hear from a health professional, but it was also the best advice I could have received. I did just that, and though not a viable or desirable career path for most people with pain, I went back to graduate school and studied human movement, sport and exercise psychology, and pain science. I began writing about what I was learning in school and about my pain and about myself with pain on my blog, My Cup of Joe, which is now housed over on Substack as a newsletter. I wrote at first just to make sense of things, to make sense of what I was learning and how it applied to me and what I could do with it, and on the off chance that it could help other people feel seen and help them to make sense of things too. That blog, where I tried to make sense of pain through science and stories, led to invitations to speak at conferences and in classrooms around the world, where I shared what I learned with audiences of primarily clinicians and researchers. I also found myself on podcasts and being interviewed by people and just shared my story, my understanding of pain and myself with pain, and my suggestions for change in pain research and care. Through those opportunities, I met many pain clinicians and researchers who became friends and colleagues. I was invited by some of them to become patient partner in their labs or a part of their research teams, and have been a patient partner now on research projects in the US, the UK, Denmark, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, exploring things like the lived experiences of pain and treatment, health systems strengthening, and establishing core outcome domains in research where we've prioritized learning from people with lived experiences. They've often been excluded from the generation of such knowledge. Because of my advocacy and patient partnership work, I was asked to co-chair the International Association for the Study of Pain's Presidential Task Force that formed the Global Alliance of Partners for Pain Advocacy, or GAPA, where our mission is to equitably integrate lived expertise through the study, research, and treatment of pain. And through that, I became involved in some knowledge translation efforts, such as last year's Global Year on Translating Pain Knowledge into Practice, where I co-authored 3 fact sheets and co-organized 2 webinars based on those fact sheets. I'm also a member of the Guideline Development Group on low back pain with the World Health Organization. And in 2019, I was invited to join the editorial board at the Journal of Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy as their first patient and public partnerships editor. And I've co-led our Patient as Partners in Research editorial series with some amazing co-authors and editorial support, and our Perspectives for Patients, which translates research and clinical practice guidelines into plain language. We now have at the journal a required patient and public involvement statement required for all manuscripts that are submitted, and we recommend that patients, athletes, and people living with the conditions being studied or written about are included as authors and co-authors. I've also been an author on peer-reviewed articles myself in academic journals and 7 textbook chapters, 4 of which have been published and 3 of which are to come, and have been a peer reviewer of articles submitted to JOSPT cases in pain medicine. I've also been a part of putting conferences together, including GAPA's Uplift Conference in 2021, and as a part of this steering committee for the PxP conference. So just to sum all of that up, I've been involved in a lot of different ways of amplifying the outputs of research, from my blog turned Substack to conference presentations and guest lectures in classrooms, to webinars and fact sheets and podcasts and interviews, to guideline development and articles and textbook chapters, and sharing my story and expertise in conferences like this. And I didn't intend to do any of this. I did not plan on becoming an advocate or a patient partner. I just ended up here, and I look forward to discussing all of the ways that all of us, no matter our level of experience in this work, can meaningfully and beneficially contribute to knowledge generation, translation, and dissemination.
Thank you, Jo, for that. And I'll mention a little bit about myself. My name is Janice Tufte, and I'm from Seattle, Washington. And I first got involved with research about 12 years ago, and actually 10 to 12 years ago. And I really didn't know anything about research. Somebody in governance, where I was volunteering at my local medical center, asked if I wanted to read a project proposal, and I was accepted onto it, and I ended up being a patient co-investigator with another patient co-investigator, and we didn't really know what all that would entail. We met each other on the first day of the science meeting, and it was a PCORI, Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute-funded learning health system project where we successfully published early in the study. It was titled Learning to Swim with the Experts. And I coined that term because I added little notations in the paper about feeling like we were thrown into the deep end and learning to tread water. And it was interesting. It was peer reviewed, and the peer reviewers did not like the title. They axed it. They said the paper's great, but the title, no. And the editor overruled them and said, I really like the title, but the reviewers were correct. If you have a title like that, it is very hard to find, say, patient partners in research. So, but now it's been cited enough that it's, we've been cited quite a few times, so it's recognized. But it was about the learnings and the takeaways of us 2 patient co-investigators that were totally research naive, and and then that project, which is a Learning to Integrate Neighborhoods of Clinical Care project, published 2 more papers. One of them was an evaluation paper. The other, the design paper, was very hard to publish. We had a very collaborative design process, and just take into account this was 2012 and 13. We had half of the design team was patients and caregivers from different clinics, and half of the rest of it was professionals from different medical clinics. But it was a challenge to have it published. So I learned a lot about that. And I do believe once you have broken that glass ceiling and you have published as a patient partner, you'll be asked to participate again. I want to say I attempted a blog, though I was underimpressed with my own results, and have continued to participating with scholarly co-authored papers, mostly on equity. And I think there's maybe 6 or 7 papers that I've co-authored on this, National Academy of Medicine, as well as with University of Ottawa during COVID, McMaster and others, and COVID End, and now, which is Global Commission, I'm involved with. And I was going to say that the equitable design methods, it's also been on equity in healthcare settings and strategies to help inform decision makers, as well as system and structural policies. I've also co-authored multiple guidelines, only one listed as one of the primary authors. The rest of them, I don't know, maybe 10, I don't know how many actually, with American College of Physicians. I was in the full guideline process, so I was given authorship credit as a public member. And I've been a first author on one peer-reviewed paper, but it really was honorific. I always mention this part because I initiated it, and I asked two emerging researchers who both were PhDs and fellows, recognized fellows, if they wanted to write a paper with me on cultural responsive design and health design. And so I was initiated by myself, and we developed what was called the RESPECT framework. And this paper has never been cited, and I'm just bringing this up because you never know. But I was asked by the American Hospital Association to present that framework last year. Unfortunately, I could not attend because I had a scheduled surgery. So sometimes things come in different ways, right? So I have found it's been beneficial to ask people if they would like to write something after I've worked with them on a project. And everybody has different writing styles. And just to be honest, writing when you have I'm writing one right now, there's like 40 people on it. It's very challenging. And one of the first ones I had 8 people, and it took us years, and we almost axed it halfway through. We presented on what we were talking about for the National Academy of Medicine, but it turned out, it's been cited, and it turned out, fine. But so also another thing I do is social media. So I take research papers and, findings and interesting facts that might impact my Muslim community that's very diverse, and do post this on a Facebook page called Evidence-Based Healthcare for Muslims. And one of the ones that was really noticed was the one on Southeast Indian women. They have a much higher rate of heart disease, which I did not know about. And it really came out during COVID. They had a lot of webinars on it through the American Heart Association. So, sometimes what I'm able to share really can help to impact my community, as well as medications, perhaps in some specific, communities where one might work better than other with sharing evidence. And I do use Twitter as really my primary, and Instagram. But now it's on to the next part. So Joe, I am thinking you might explain some more of the different research outputs that help communicate research findings, and how the research outputs might be different depending on the audience. And then Karen might respond after Joe.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we've touched upon all of these different ways that research can be shared, and I'm not really sure where the different audiences are, because I know I'm not on social media anymore, so that's an area that I miss out on now. But I met a lot of the researchers and clinicians that I know now through social media, and I know a lot of research is shared through that. So I think there might be a perception that a lot of patients find information on social media, but I think a lot of researchers and clinicians do as well. And then there's all of those kind of academic channels of sharing research through publications and journals, peer-reviewed publications, and through conferences. A lot of continuing education conferences, or the society conferences like the pain societies put on. So there's tons of different ways that I think people can find their niche in figuring out how they want to communicate research that they've been a part of, or research that they're interested in. That's how I first started on my blog, was just sharing what I was learning of the research and then trying to make sense of it into my own story. But then people who like to present, who like to have more, visual or oral presentations of that, could do more of the poster presentations at conferences, or presenting at conferences, or in webinars, or in classrooms. I'm not sure if that answered the question, but that was where my mind went.
Yeah. And Karen, would you like me to repeat it, or are you?
I'm good to go, I think. Thanks, Janice. I think I might just, big picture, I've worked in the peer-reviewed publications space for about 30 years, and I think one of the most exciting things, and to everybody on this conference, the most exciting thing is seeing the patient voice come into the peer-reviewed literature. We've heard about stay in your lane, peer-reviewed literature. I was in a boardroom once and talking to a very large healthcare industry sponsor about the importance of, listening to patients. And he said to me, patients have no place in the peer-reviewed literature. This is serious. And I looked at him and I thought, oh, you've got no idea. And I just had a visual of a dinosaur, that you have no idea what's about to happen. And really, we've shown through our research that even in the last 5 years, the number of patient-authored publications has tripled. And we know that's an underestimate. But I think we really have to do all that we can to support, guide, and train patient advocates so that they can feel confident publishing in the peer-reviewed literature. I was really impressed by the poll results, Janice, how many people have done that. But you guys are pioneers. Out of all the publications that are out there, we still have a limited voice in the literature. And we know that peer-reviewed publications are the most important means of information that clinicians use to affect patient care. So if you're being affected by those publications, why shouldn't your voice be in those publications? For equity, diversity, all those really good reasons. The problem is it can be hard, right? The barriers can be there. Janice, you've spoken about some of the difficulties. And so it's not just about learning how to write. One of the things I would flag to people on this call is that we identified with our patient co-creators 3 areas of risk for patient authors just through inadvertent mistakes that can happen and inexperience, but you don't want to be caught out. 1 is you need to meet the 4 criteria for authorship. 2 is you need to disclose fully. It's very rare for someone to say, I have no conflicts or competing interests. Always disclose financial and non-financial. And 3, obey the copyright laws, or let's help get changed. But what I would hate to see, again, our research, we've shown that no patient-authored publications have been removed from the literature for misconduct or mistake. So let's not set up patients for failure or trial and error. Let's give the free resources so that you can set yourself up for success.
That's wonderful, Karen. I really appreciate what all you shared. And so the next thing we're going to talk about is blogs. And I just want to mention something. After we met for this conference, we met in person, or not in person, and virtually as panelists. And I was wondering, why don't people take blogs as seriously sometimes? And I realized, well, we can't look them up on Google Scholar, right? They're not showing up on Medline. So if some people on this call don't know that, that's a little bit of a difference. But blogs can have so much information that they can help to initiate research and help to adjunct. I'm sure they've been cited at times too. But Eileen, we'd like to know a little bit more about your blog. And Joe, we'd like to hear a little bit more about yours after Eileen.
All right.
Challenges, maybe, and successes.
Sorry, I have a cat and she's wanting to come and say hello, but she's not allowed to. My blog, well, I guess when it comes to research is I try and involve as much what I learn from participating in research as a patient partner, taking part in studies, attending conferences, watching webinars, having discussion with researchers, those researchers that will give me the time of the day and value that I have a community that follows me and looks to me for advice. And over time, I've kind of taken that as a very serious role because I want people to know, like, hey, like there's this amazing research being done out there in the arthritis community, and it's really showing a lot of things about our disease, particularly like the arthritis community really wants to be taken seriously. And the research points to saying rheumatoid arthritis, all forms of arthritis, are a very serious condition and need to be taken serious. And I think my involvement in research has helped me to be able to very clearly express that. And then also, participating in studies myself, what I've learned from them. I participated in 2 absolutely life-changing studies for myself with Arthritis Research Canada. One was using a health tracker and an app to monitor my rheumatoid arthritis symptoms and daily activity. There's brain fog for you. And I was able to talk about everything that I learned about my disease and then also inspire people at the same time with all the visualization and what I was learning to take better care of themselves. And then I was able to take part in an exercise study with strength training and rheumatoid arthritis. And those were opportunities that not only did I learn for myself, but I was able to explain to people who had no idea how to exercise with rheumatoid arthritis, but wanted to hear from a patient, because we speak a certain language to each other. They wanted to hear those words from a patient. How do they know what shoes are the best? Or how do they know what pain to look out for? Who can best describe that but other patients? So there's so many different opportunities to involve research into my blog. And I think it's what actually makes my blog stand out.
Oh, you have anything to add about your successes, challenges of yours?
Yeah. So again, like I started my blog initially back in like 2013. It was terrible because I was just trying to make sense of I had just medically retired from the fire department. I had no idea what the future of my life held. I had had surgery but still had pain. I had so much confusion around why I still had pain, and my life had been so utterly upended by my experiences. And I didn't get sufficient information or even, really good information when I was going through the healthcare process and when I was in the workers' compensation system. It was only when I came to find all of that stuff on my own later, like all of that self-research I did. I know we had a self-research session yesterday, that I started to be able to make sense of why I still had pain and potential things that I could do about it, and started to understand the science better. So when I was writing my blog, I was just trying to make sense of the science and how it applied to me and how it applied to me as a person now living with pain, which was a much different person than I had been before this pain had started. So science has always kind of infused my blog, but my blog is very much just my perceptions and understandings and the way that I have made sense of things. But I think that through blogs, we can contextualize the research in ways that it's hard to do in other ways. We contextualize the research and how it applies to real people's lives. And I think that's beneficial, not just for other people living with pain, but for clinicians and researchers too, where that added context really helps them see why this research is important, or why these clinical practice guidelines or clinical practices are important and how they actually affect people. And there's obviously a broad range of what blogs can do and the formats and styles that they take. But I think that informal kind of approach to sharing research and best practices is really valuable, not just for patients and the public, but for clinicians, for researchers where that might not be their area of expertise. At JOSPT now, which is a peer-reviewed journal, we have JOSPT blogs too, which is just presenting research and expert opinions in clinical practice and in a different way that can potentially be more engaging and more accessible to more people. And I think that's invaluable.
Thank you for sharing that. Blogs are very interesting, and who follows who, and there's always more to find, I think, on different blogs. And, regarding peer-reviewed publications and plain language summaries, you touched on this when you introduced yourself, Karen. We'd like to hear more about that in the publishing process overall. And then we'd love to hear from Joe as a patient editor at a journal afterwards.
Thanks, Janice. I think if I can just pick up on what Joe was saying about and what we've heard previously in this conference about we need to go where the patients are for recruitment into clinical trials, and the same way with peer-reviewed publications, we need to go where people are now, and people are not having the time to read a 30-page medical journal article where we know, again, it's been measured that the jargon is increasing, they're becoming increasingly difficult to read. And so this has really led to a disruptive influence whereby now, think of that peer-reviewed publication as the base of the tree, but then you're getting all different types of communication methods, be those podcasts, blogs, patient perspective editorials, plain language summaries, audio, graphical abstracts. So there's a whole range of communication methods that are each suited to different types of audiences, but at its core, there's trusted, current, credible research evidence that's driving that. And so the peer-reviewed publication with patient authors, our research has shown, and we're writing this up in a review article right now, that if you have patient authors, this is this drive to make sure we're getting the information, the evidence to people who need to understand it and act on it. If you have a patient author of a publication, you're more likely to have that publication available as open access, so it won't be hidden behind a paywall. If you have a patient author, you're more likely to have a plain language summary accompany that. And I'll step into plain language summaries just in a minute. You're less likely to have that paper retracted for misconduct. So there's a number of advantages that go with that. Also, there's some early evidence, and anybody that wants to do more research on this, please do, that you get more downloads and more higher attention scores if a patient's involved. So when people say, why should patients be involved in a publication? We'll have a manuscript coming out soon where you can just go, there's 5 reasons. Just to swap to plain language summaries, it's not unlike what Eileen's been speaking about or Joe's been speaking about. It's just a more understandable way where you can have in 1 or 2 pages or even a paragraph. The ideal evidence-based template is one where you have text and visuals, but 2 to 3 pages, the key points, it's got lots of white space, lots of headings, it's written in understandable language. There's the link back to the original peer-reviewed publication, so if you want to know more, you can. And even though plain language summaries, we did the first workshop on this in London in 2018, where we brought a whole bunch of different stakeholders together to co-create this template. It's not just patients that are finding these plain language summaries really useful. Non-specialist physicians in that area are picking them up. Peer reviewers are looking at them before they peer review. The media are looking at them, so they're less likely to make a mistake when they're reporting that research. So again, just encouraging these plain language summaries of publications. They are peer reviewed and they sit next to the publication, but you can read the PLS first, and then it makes it easier to understand the peer reviewed publications. I think I'll stop there and at others.
Thank you. So important. And Joe, a little bit about being an editor. BMJ has patient editors, and other Journal of Health Design, and more journals are now having editors, patient editors on.
Yeah, and BMJ was really the pioneer, I think, in having patient and public editors. And I'm really grateful for my position with JOSPT, because I was completely new to publishing altogether and editing, being an editor altogether. And so it's been a learn as I go process. But I think it's so important, and something that's come up in other conversations too, that just having that patient or public editor in the room kind of changes the conversation, even when we're not contributing to the conversation. So we have an impact just by our presence, and then it can start to change, the thought processes of other editors too, and how we can involve patient and public authors more in the manuscripts. And for all of these benefits that I'm trying to write down madly from Karen that I can share with our editorial board at JOSPT too, is it's not just good for the patient partners and the public to include patient partners, it's also good for the researchers and the authors who are trying to get their work out there. But it's been a really positive experience for me too. And I have, from those experiences, I wonder why we have so many barriers to just writing up the research itself, the peer-reviewed research in plain language. Why we are like this. It's worrying to hear that we're getting more into jargon and more into really hard to read language, because that doesn't just affect patients in the public, it affects clinicians, it affects researchers where that's not their area of specialty, and it makes the research so inaccessible and just puts up additional barriers to that information being used in practical and meaningful ways for the people who are living with the conditions that are being written about. So I think having patients and public authors, co-authors, editors, peer reviewers can really help to make research more accessible and more actionable for everybody, not just for us. But I think I'll leave it at that.
Yep. Thank you so much. It's so important that we have these positions now, and it's so true that professionals definitely look at the plain language summaries. I just want to touch on something we didn't mention was that we're also able to help write abstracts for posters and conference presentations. And how I learned to write an abstract was I've literally reviewed hundreds of abstracts for a number of conferences, and that was, it still is, you know, very interesting, international as well as national. And I actually did present, I did write an abstract, and I was accepted to an international conference last year. It was very exciting for me. It was during COVID, so it was a poster, but it was like a video poster. And so I had that one success. I really haven't tried it again, but that's another way to actually learn. And I recommend to everybody that somebody asked, how do you get involved with writing? And basically, you know, I think that, you know, attending webinars, like we mentioned, conferences like this, and looking at some of our resources, you'll be able to read more about it. But this is the last question before we have another poll. What are some of the benefits of engaging patients in communicating research results? And what might be most beneficial to patients, researchers, and research? And Eileen maybe wants to touch on blogs, and Joe might want to, you know, stories to contextualize research, or whatever you'd like to talk about.
Well, you know, I think a lot of the benefits have already been described. But I do want to point out that what patients are writing on their blogs about their firsthand experience living with pain or other various types of health issues is a great way for clinicians and researchers to deeper understand how the disease and conditions affect us, and could potentially also hold research topics in there if they dig deep enough into it. So that obviously would take a bit of extra reading, but I think it's a great way to learn about how this is affecting our lives. And it gives you a broader range of patients, not just the ones in like your city or the ones that are involved in your organization. You can find ones that aren't involved. And so, yeah, I think that's probably the main point that I would want to bring up on that.
Great. And Joe, do you want to touch on like stories and how it might contextualize research?
Sure, yeah. I think that involving people with lived experience of whatever the condition that is being studied or written about is invaluable, because we will never understand pain by just understanding the biology of pain. We will never understand pain through any randomized controlled trial or meta-analysis or systematic review. We can only really understand pain if we learn from the people who are living with it. We can only understand a condition if we learn from the people who are living with it. And it's not a replacement for all of the scientific evidence. It's an addition to, it's another way of knowing, another form of knowledge that's invaluable. And it's something that's often excluded and neglected in current, you know, knowledge translation and dissemination in articles. And by adding in that perspective, it adds so much richness to whatever it is that's being researched or written about. It contextualizes the research and actually makes it important. It makes it relatable to people, and people living with the condition then can take that research and show how it applies to their lives or how it doesn't. And it can also highlight why so much research is disconnected from the patients and the public who are living with those conditions. By including them, maybe we can make research questions more relevant, the way that we write up the research more relevant and meaningful and accessible and actionable, that we can improve perhaps how it's implemented into practice and in the public sphere. By including the real world in the process, we make it more meaningful to the real world in the end, because there's such a huge gap between the research that's being done and its ability to actually have meaningful, you know, change within people who are living with whatever it is that's being researched. So I think adding in patient and public partners at all levels of the research spectrum, including in knowledge generation, in knowledge translation, knowledge mobilization, whatever it is called, knowledge dissemination, is invaluable when it comes to actually making the research matter. And I think that researchers are they really want that to happen too. They want their work to matter. They want their research to matter and have an impact on people who are living with pain or living with a condition. And by working with patient partners, even if they're a basic science researcher, as we heard from Nader yesterday, it can have such a huge impact. And I think that we don't talk about those benefits enough, and that it's not just for the patient and public partners. It's a huge benefit to us, but it's also a huge benefit to the research community, to the publishing community too.
Eileen, is this about the poster?
No, I just wanted, I thought of one benefit of engaging patients who have blogs and social media channels. And what it can be really tricky in research is recruitment. So through my channels, they call us patient influencers. I do not see myself as an influencer, but we're called that. And I have influenced people to be involved in research that didn't know where to get involved in research before. So that can be very beneficial when you're communicating research results, because there's people watching us saying, hey, I kind of want to do what she's doing, and that will get them involved in studies. And recruitment can be really difficult. There's been studies that I've helped out with, and they've matched all their recruitment needs in a very short a period of time because I posted on my social media channels.
That's really, really important. And we're going to go now to, we have a poll with 2 more questions. We'd like to see where you're at. And here it is. So the first one is, should you be able to access and understand research findings that are relevant to healthcare? How much do you agree or disagree? And the second one is, the perspective of patients should be included when research findings, which will have a direct impact on patient care, are communicated to healthcare professionals. How much do you agree or disagree with this statement? We're looking forward to your answers.
I wanted to ask Zoom why hosts and panelists can't vote.
I'm sorry?
I said I want to ask Zoom why hosts and panelists can't vote on polls.
We're biased. No, just kidding. Are answers still coming in? About there. We got it here. It'll be coming up in just a minute. We appreciate your patience. Whoa. So I figured it would be pretty close on this one. This is the one. Do you believe that we should have access to understandable, understand recent research findings? So that's impressive. And if we could have for the next, the second answer, second question. Strongly agree, the same thing, as perspective of patients should be included, and there wasn't any disagree or strongly disagree. So and we have a direct impact on healthcare, so I think that's definitely in our in our bank. So I just want to say that now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges to be aware of in research. So a lot of people aren't aware. And like I mentioned, when I first got involved, I didn't know anything really about research, and we just came in cold to a science group, right? And I had to take what's called CITI training or institutional review board. There's different names for it, but ethics training and conflict, we're going to talk about conflict of interest, working with industry and ethics. And Karen touched on this a little bit earlier, and we'd like her to touch on that, and she might have another comment about something else as well.
Thanks, Janice. Just on, I saw the poster question in the Q&A, and I've just posted a link to the Better Poster template that was sort of pioneered by Mike Morrison, who came into academia and just went, why have we got this 10-point font vomit all over a poster board? Can't we do better? And, it just shows that tradition, academia can change, and now you're finding conferences embracing the Better Poster format. It's not rocket science, it's just more white space, more key points. Like, just don't try and reprint your manuscript on a poster. So if people want to have a look at that, it is gaining traction. I think the polls, Janice, were great, and Kelly, I absolutely agree with you, slightly biased mob here. All I can say is that I was putting my hand over my heart saying, you can't ever assume. So if people had thought there was some reason why patients shouldn't have access, why they shouldn't contribute, I'd be really keen to listen to that. All I can say is that please keep doing what you can to contribute, to author, to present, because we've just got to have that patient voice in the peer-reviewed literature, because it leads to so many other things. And I will say, and it gets into the industry part, there are codes of conduct, codes of ethics. There's an international umbrella group for all healthcare industry across the world, the IFPMA, and they have said that patients do have the right to current, credible information. But there's a fear through industry, particularly in some quarters, that if patients get involved, then the industry partner could be fined for promoting to patients. So I think the more patients can raise their hand and say, we have a right to information, you are not promoting to us, we can't write a prescription, but we have the right to information. I think we have to really balance the scales back towards information is not promotion. And so if you're working with industry, I think it's worth having that discussion about why you do think you should be able to access and understand why you shouldn't have information behind a paywall. And I really feel for Annette in the chat there. So when you're working with industry, the one document I would point you to is Good Publication Practice Guidelines 2022. It was published in Annals of Internal Medicine, which is one of the top 5 medical journals in the world. So a really respected journal. And it has the ethical guidelines. It will outline your rights and responsibilities as a patient author. And you just don't have rights, you have responsibilities. And if you read that and you're working with your industry partner, then you know what they should know. If they're not following GPP 22, that is a red flag. I can put it in the chat afterwards. So if you're working with industry, these are guidelines specifically designed for industry to work ethically and effectively.
Great. Thank you. We'll look forward to having that. And Joe, would you like to touch on a little bit about research and journal editors not being convinced patients as co-authors? I think that you had mentioned it and Karen mentioned it. We'd like to hear a little bit on your aspect of that, of how it still isn't received well everywhere.
Yeah, well, and I think during our chat that we had while we were prepping for this, we reframed it because it was almost 70% of editors that thought that patient partners could be authors or patients could be authors, and 30% that we still need to kind of bring along to agree that patient partners can be authors. And Karen's touched upon all of the really important points. There are author guidelines, but there's no reason that patient partners can't meet those author guidelines. So it's just a matter of knowing what the requirements are for authorship in general and for a specific journal, and then meeting those authorship guidelines for the patient partners. And then if editors are still resistant to that, then there's obviously issues. There are still huge barriers, though, to patient partners being authors, including not having like institutional affiliations. I don't have an institutional affiliation, and I'm going through the process right now of co-authoring a commentary where we can't even get past the first screen because we don't have an institution for the submission, because we don't have an institution to for me as an author, and then it prevents us from even submitting the manuscript. And in order to get past that screen, we have to kind of make up an institution, which is probably not ethical either. So we're working with the journal right now to figure out how to navigate that. But there's a lot of institutional barriers still to patient partnership. We talked about it in one of the earlier sessions too. A lot of patient partners don't have library access. It's Annette was mentioning that she doesn't have access to an article that she was a co-author on, because it's behind a paywall. And most of us, because we aren't associated with an institution, we don't have library access and we can't get past those paywalls. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that I think we can tackle both as institutions and as publishers of journals to make it easier for patient partners to become authors, not by limiting the criteria, but by making some of those barriers less onerous, like the institutional affiliation or the email, having to have an institutional email. I only have a Gmail account. I don't have an institutional account in some for some submission processes, that's not acceptable. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that can be tackled to make it easier for patient partners and the public to become authors, while still, following the guidelines for authorship. I don't know if I answered the question again, but
yeah, I think you did just fine. This is the last subject before we'll do a quick positive suggestion. We have 5 minutes left. So one thing that it has been an issue is really in research as well as in dissemination, of outputs of results, is on equity, diversion, and inclusion in this space. And I just want to add that I think it's been easy for me to invite people from different backgrounds, as I am a people person and my community is very diverse. And most of the people I intentionally invite because of their desire to advance patient partnerships and research and their skills, their backgrounds, and their diversity. I myself do not have a degree, and I have experienced many negative social drivers. So I'm a tick the box too, actually, and really care about who I ask to be involved with, if they're treated fairly. I make it very clear up front. As someone mentioned earlier today, I will say no to recommending someone to a project and say no myself if I feel researchers and professional partners are not being transparent from the beginning. And I bring up compensation. It has to either be a career advancement or compensation. And Karen, you have a very interesting comment regarding diversity in the research space, in writing space. I'd love to hear it.
Well, I think if you look at the gender diversity on our speaker panel right now and the organizing committee, it's, and I realize I am speaking binary outcomes here, but women outnumber men, and we did some research looking at the gender diversity in patient authors, and actually found, whilst it was great to have patients adding a diverse voice to the literature, because normally it's clinicians and scientists, so we do have diversity by having the patient voice there, but then we looked at the diversity of those authors, those patient authors, and we found 3 things. 1, most were publishing in English. 2, most were from high income countries, and 3, most were women. And just on that latter point, in academia, most authors are male. And so it's curious that it's the complete flip in patient authorship, that most patient authors are female. And so our trivia, if your name is Maureen or Dave, those were the most frequent names for patient authors. So it also, if you use naming software, it suggests that these patient authors are also, middle-aged to older individuals. So I think we need to keep doing the research, looking at patient authors, looking at diversity, because some of the findings are actually surprising. Some not so much, but some are surprising. And if we measure this, then we can take steps and see if we can improve patient author diversity.
Thank you for that. And actually, we're at the 2-minute mark. So what we're going to talk about right now is one final thought, I guess 30 seconds, a quick positive suggestion about why patients should be involved in writing dissemination outputs. Joe, you want to start?
Yeah, I think I've covered this and throughout my answers to all of the questions, but my biggest takeaway is that it's not just beneficial for us, it's beneficial for the entire field of pain overall. And also, I want everyone to know, like I said at the beginning when I introduced myself, I came into all of this accidentally. I didn't mean to be here. Like, we all, no matter what our level of engagement with research is, what our level of engagement with writing is, we all have something to offer in these spaces. So I just want everyone to know that their voices, their perspectives, their insights are incredibly valuable, and they broaden and deepen our understanding of pain and how to get the knowledge and the evidence that we have generated about pain into the world in more effective and meaningful ways. And I just want everyone to go forth and be a part of this moving forward.
Great. Karen?
Thank you. In closing, I would just say, set yourself up for success. You know, postgraduate students in university and academia get trained on how to write and how to publish, and they absorb so much every day. So if you want to publish in the peer-reviewed literature, don't make it hard on yourself, don't make mistakes, don't lack confidence. I would recommend there's a free online course from WeCan. It'll be in the Resources Hub. It's not just a writing course. There's 4 modules. It takes you through module 1, ethics, module 2, how to plan your publication, number 3, how to write, and then number 4, how to share. Set yourself up for success. But final words from a patient co-editor was Richard Stevens, who's the co-editor of Research Involvement Engagement. And he said, of course, patients should be authors of peer-reviewed publications. It's our story you're telling.
Well, that's wonderful. And Eileen, positive comments?
Yes, but Trudy, I just saw your question. I will send you that abstract poster in a message. So sorry I didn't see that till now. But I'm going to regurgitate a very common saying that we all know. Nothing about us without us, really. I think it all comes down to that, because we are the people that you are working for.
Thank you. That's a wonderful ending. And I just want to mention that once you start writing, and you will get a lot of rejections, I'm just going to say, and the same thing happens in research. So I've seen that throughout the day. How can I be involved? Somebody wrote about it. How can we, how can we start writing like this? And so I would just suggest looking at our resources. And I can't tell you how many times, how many rejections we went through one of our first papers that I just was astounded, and we had to pay, right, to send it in. And it was very disappointing. And I went to a conference one time for the Health Services Research Conference and Network, and they actually gave out awards for the biggest loser. I mean, so everybody's aware of it because they go to the conference, but the people that get the most research awards rejected. And so I just want to say, don't let that stop you. Failure can lead to success, but people are aware. I've had multiple rejections this year, so don't let that stop you. Just continue, and feel free to ask people like ourselves for assistance. And Joletta, I think this wraps up our day, and it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Janice. And it does wrap up our day. So it's been an exciting, incredible, and valuable few days. On behalf of everyone at PxP, I would like to thank all of the speakers, the moderators, the other 2 hosts, and all of the attendees who joined us today and throughout the conference. We hope you enjoyed the sessions and will join us online at the PxP website and again next year for the 2nd annual PxP conference. Please fill out our survey about your experience today. There's a link in the chat. It will also pop up when you leave the meeting. We appreciate you taking the time to fill out the survey, as we know your time is valuable, but everything that you share will help us to make next year's PxP even better. All recordings and links will be put up soon on the PxP website, also linked in the chat. And the website has a bunch of resources already there. There's a bunch of resources and links that will hopefully help you to continue on your patient partnership and research journey. As you reflect on the conference or explore the resources on the website, please continue to share about PxP on social media using the hashtag PxP23. And thank you all for your support. Can't wait to see you next year. Bye, everyone.